welcome back. Today I'm with the Mercedes 190e again, and I'm going to discuss a bit of a buyer's guide so you know what to look for. And to begin with, let's start with the bodywork. You are going to be looking for rust anywhere, and I'll point out the main places. These front wings, like on any Mercedes of this era, love to rust, especially around here, around the trim. Again, have a good look. This is a prime example here of how they start to rust. And look, even around here, and sometimes around the side marker or the where these Sacco panels are mounted. But yeah, so rust is going to be your main concern. And if we start working our way back, I suppose one other place to check on the front is the battery tray area. Around the battery tray, you need to have a good look down there. If the battery tray is starting to rust, probably indicates that you might have rust underneath as well. You really need to check it's not starting to go through further. Usually if the battery tray is really bad, it might start going through. So make sure you check that. Check around the chassis legs and turrets around there. That's on the front, although mine is even starting to rust at the edge of the bonnet. So you know, obviously, like any old car, they can start to rust anywhere, but I'm going to point out the most common bits. So on the doors, check the bottom of the doors. Really easy to do on mine since I've got no door card, but what you're looking for is this bottom edge here. That's because water gets into there, and then the drain holes at the bottom get blocked, and it just accumulates there and starts to rot out. Okay, another common place, the rear quarters, and this is really common all the way kind of from down there around this area, okay, behind the bumper around there, the inner arches like going back from there. That's really common. You'll probably find some rust behind there as well once you take the bumper off. And then if you come around the back, there's pretty much everywhere to check here, really, if I'm honest. So this is one spot. So they start to rust there because it's not sealed properly or water's starting to collect there. And then you need to have a good look underneath the parcel shelf. Make sure it's not starting to rust there. If you can, take these plastic liners out, and the bottom of this there starts rusting on both sides. Then you also have rust in the wheel well, which you can see there I've had repaired, but you can have a look underneath. Hopefully see it like around there where it's been repaired. So yeah, that's on the rear. And then the other couple of things you need to look out for is for any water, you know, ingress into the car. These rear light seals often are a cause of that. The boot lock, even from the spoiler holes, it can seep in, and then it'll sit in here and you know, drench the whole boot really. That's the stuff to check externally on the bodywork. Obviously make sure the usual, that it's free of dents, the gaps are good. You can see here the gap isn't great, that's because it's had an aftermarket wing, and there aren't any significant scratches, dents, whatever else, as you would with any other car. You know, all of the things you can see on this car. So lack appeal, no dents surprisingly, it's pretty straight, but you know, some of the panels aren't great, there's rust, and all of this stuff, you know, paintwork isn't cheap, not cheap at all. I mean, for example, for the rust repair just on the rear quarters, that was about £2,000 overall, including the welding and paint, so that's not a small amount of money really. Right, that's the exterior. Now the other thing you need to do is have a good look underneath, because all 4 jacking points are prone to going. You ideally want to get behind these covers and have a look at the what the sills are looking like. Obviously with a kit like this it's difficult, but you can at least get underneath and have a good look. The other thing you can ask the owner to potentially do is, because it's relatively easy, is to pop out the bottom seat base, because there's just these 2 clips here. There'll be a red clip with a little lever that you push on both sides, and then you can lift the seat out and pull it away, and then you can have a good look under there. So you can see there it's had a rust repair, similar on that side as well on mine, and that's a pretty common place for them to go. And then, as I mentioned, the jacking points underneath, just going to be really difficult to see since this car's quite low. So that is hopefully all of the places you should be looking for rust. The other main bit is the sunroof and its channels, which go down to the sunroof drains, which go down there and then down into the boot as well. And you know, if they're corroded, or you know, the pipes popped off or leaking, you'll again get some water ingress into the car, causing rust in certain places. Sorry, another place I missed was actually checking behind these covers, very close there. Have a good look, and at these edges, that's another place where they start to go really. Yeah, let's talk about engine, drivetrain, and other bits and pieces. Engine wise, obviously you can have a few variants. This is the 2.5 16 valve. The 2.3 16 valve is very similar. What I'd check in terms of the history for these, which often gets neglected, is the valve adjustment. They're actually shims, which, you know, they're not like hydraulic tappets. They're fixed shims where you need to check the clearances and change them out. Obviously look for oil changes. The other thing I'd check on the 2.3 and the 2.5 is this manifold. Make sure it's not cracked anywhere, as those are quite expensive. I think we are talking £500–600 plus just for that manifold. And in terms of engine, you know, make sure you get to start it cold and hot. It should, you know, if everything's working as it should, you know, pretty much crank up straight away from cold. And same with hot, but with it being K-Jet, it can be temperamental, so make sure you check that. And then driving wise, There should be no flat spots. It should rev completely through the rev range. It shouldn't idle high. Idle for these is around 1000 RPM for a 2.3, 2.5 16 valve. I think it's a bit lower for some of the other engine variants, but you know, check what it should be before you go. What else is there to have a look at? Probably make sure, you know, these aren't cracked or anything. They're not particularly expensive, but you know, they're generic to every 190e, so you can pick them up quite easily. What else? Obviously check the usual stuff like tires, brakes, suspension. Now, suspension wise, obviously on a 2.3 or a 2.5 16 valve, you'll have rear hydraulic dampers, which are self-leveling. So I think as I've explained previously, if the car's loaded in the back, there's a lever system which will pump more hydraulic fluid into the back shocks to lift it back up to the level that it should be at. And if the ride height isn't quite correct, you know, it's either sitting high. If it's sitting high and a bit crashy when you drive, that means that the rear accumulators need refreshing. And if it's sagging, it probably means, you know, the SLS system isn't working as it should. It consists of, like I said, a lever system at the back. There's lines running along the floor, and they run to the pump at the front of the engine, just there. And obviously, if you wanted to keep that original system, it's not that cheap to get that all refurbished. You know, we're talking a couple of £100 for maybe the accumulators. Probably not as much as that actually. Probably about £100 for the accumulators, and then rear shocks wise, you could maybe get them rebuilt. I'm not too sure how much that would cost, but I think if you're buying them new, they are quite expensive. I'll maybe stick up a price on screen now. You'll find that a lot of these cars have had their suspension swapped out, and it's a bit of a debated topic really, because you know, some people obviously want to keep it as original as possible, but you know, some of the aftermarket stuff is actually you know, better than OEM now, because of the advancements in suspension technology really. But that feature on the rear is actually, you know, one of the cool features for that era, you know, as being quite advanced. The other thing that actually is related to that is the hydraulic locking diff, which also runs off the same hydraulic pump on the front of the engine. And you know, once you hit 30 miles an hour, I think it is, the rear diff will lock using hydraulic pressure. I suppose driving wise, again, you know, suspension wise, there shouldn't be any knocking. You know, especially from the rear, if you hear any knocking on the rear, it probably means you know, something on the rear subframe with the multi-link suspension setup isn't quite right, and you might have to go through a bit of a refurbishment process on that. I suppose in terms of diff, they are known to whine a bit. It's not conclusive from what I remember, but you know, some people say they even used to whine from new. This one doesn't really whine, but I'd probably you know, go about changing the rear diff oil at least. Maybe that helps it a bit. But you know, listen out for maybe excessive whine from the rear diff. In terms of gear changes, you know, you should be able to get into gear quite nicely. It is quite notchy. You know, a lot of car reviewers described it when it was new like that as well. But you know, you should be able to get it into gear relatively easily. And that's obviously specific to the Mercedes 190 16 valves, 16 valve versions. I suppose one bit I forgot to mention in terms of rust where I do have it is this bit here around the rear lights. Not too sure what's really caused that. I'm guessing it's the rear light seals kind of holding on to water, maybe on the inside, and starting to rust out. Right. I suppose on the engine, on the 2.5 and the 2.3, one of the main differences is the dual row timing chain on the 2.5 16 valve, whereas on the 2.3 it was a single. And what you probably want to listen for is any slack in the timing chain, because you know, tensioners have been known to go on the single one. You know, you could maybe, depending on how you know, how friendly the seller is, pop off the valve cover and have a quick look at the timing chain, and you can see what the condition of the guides is like as well. They are supposed to be a lifetime item, really. Not the tensioners, but the chains, but they do develop some slack over the years. Okay, let's jump onto the interior. So the one thing you need to look out for is the top of door cards up here. They will start to deform and kind of come away. I don't have that issue on this car. I've fixed that by not having any door cards. That's one way to fix it. Anyway, so in the interior I'd check for any cracks. So you can see here, prime example, cracked, and this panel is notorious for cracking. Same with this panel. Mine actually looks in decent condition, which is good. And then you want to check the top of the dash, because they can sometimes crack as well. The other thing to check on the 16 valves is the lap timer working. So if I switch the ignition on, I'll show you what it's supposed to do. There you go, that button starts and stops the timer. I did have a guide which explained exactly what each of the buttons did and how to do different functions, like measuring 0 to 60 or like average speed or things like that. The other thing on the interior is make sure all of the electrics work, so the sunroof, and then check all 4 windows go down. On both of the ones that I've had, you know, there's been cables that have become brittle, and they usually go in this rubber boot there. They'll usually go in there, and then you'll get certain windows not working. I think those are the main bits, really. A lot of the parts for one of these are not specific to the 2.5 16 valve. Obviously the kit is, the wheels are, the lap timer is, the center part of the dash is. Trying to think of any other 16 valve specific items, maybe the brakes, and obviously the SLS parts that you get. But you know, a lot of the stuff like door handles, rubbers, things that might perish aren't 16 valve specific. The door cards, they are starting to get a bit more expensive. I was quite surprised to find that people wanted well over £200 for a set, for a decent set. I think it was about £250 someone quoted for a set of door cards that aren't peeling from the top. And what I mean by peeling, so I mentioned they deform. The vinyl also starts peeling away from the door card. You know, there are ways to fix that. You can potentially use a bit of fiberglass to get it back into shape. You can maybe ask someone who's good with interior trim to try repair it, which is probably the route I'd go down rather than trying to find another door card. Door cards for 16 valves are notoriously difficult to find. On my old one, one of the armrest bits on the door card was torn, and I think it took me over a year to come across one in decent condition that was, you know, the black vinyl to match the rest of the interior. And when you do come across them, obviously they're not cheap. They're not cheap, and that's another specific item for the 16 valve cars. I suppose the other thing on the interior is the gear knob. Again, one of the things that I've swapped out really, but there's someone making replica gear knobs which are pretty good, I think out in Spain or something, and they're between 150 to 200 euros. They're no longer available from Mercedes new, and yeah, that's another 16 valve specific item. You can see a pattern developing here. Anything that is 16 valve specific is expensive, so I suppose make sure those items are in good condition, otherwise you'll end up spending a fair bit getting it up to scratch from a cosmetic perspective. I think that's it really. I hope that gives you an overview of what to look out for on, I suppose, any 190 in terms of rust and you know, mechanically, as well as specifically 190 16 valve. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one.